been lurking around on the forums for a while now, and I was about to give up until I found this thread. I've read some similar experiences to my own, so I figured you all would be able to bring more clarity to all of this. This all happened back during this past summer in the state of Kentucky. To protect his identity, and out of respect for his family, I will refer to my friend as James. I was spending time together with James, celebrating his completion of finals and my recent promotion, drinking to our heart's content, and we had the thirst of a Norse warrior at a midsummer festival. Starting with a nice bottle of Japanese whiskey that lasted all but 30 minutes. We moved on to something a little classier, Jim Beam. We sipped until day became night and everything got fuzzy around the edges. James took a long pull off the bottle before he turned to me and asked if I want to go for a night walk to our favorite stargazing spot. I obliged by taking the final swig. This was just one of the things James and I would do every weekend, and surprisingly, our parents were okay with it. Ever since we had science class together as kids, we loved stars and outer space. And the clearing was like our own private research facility. We had a large amount of forested area near where we lived, and the clearing was just 1.5 miles into the woods. I would pack my budget telescope, and we would get nice views of the moon in its differing phases, as well as nearby planets and visible galaxies. After high school, James had saved up a couple $1,000s to spend on one of those fancy scopes that could be remote controlled and could take HD videos. We would often talk about black holes, the inevitable heat death of the universe, or if there were other Earth-like planets out there with life like ours. We could even recite all the differing spectral types of stars from memory. It was the foundation of our friendship, though James was much more serious and even talked about going to college for a degree in astronomy once he had finished his general education courses at the local community college. He was the only kid from class that said he wanted to be an astronaut and was serious about it. I was content looking at the stars through my telescope from my backyard, beer in hand, and not being in debt. It was a bad idea, but we did not care, and off into the night we went. Along the way, there was this drainage ditch we would pass by. Alluring today as it was back then, for no good reason other than it was creepy. Being as inebriated as we were, we took the bait and headed down. Being extra careful to scale down the steep incline of the ditch walls, we made it inside. It was your standard drainage ditch, a large concrete canal, stretching out about 10 miles in both directions, dividing the forested land in two. There was an overpass that ran across a small portion of the ditch like a bridge, connecting the two pieces of land so that people could walk across. Along the graffiti-riddled walls of the canals were drainage holes to help disperse the water should the levels rise high enough. One of these was a drainage tube about 2 mm wide and 50 m long, what we dubbed the butthole. The other end of the butthole led into the forest on the other side. As kids, we would crawl through it and act like it was a portal to another dimension, or it would take us back in time. James could not resist. "Dude, look, the butthole! I'm going in, man," he exclaimed. "I can't believe you actually said that out loud. Be careful, you're going to scrape your knees or bonk your head." I warned. Once he got further in, he stopped moving. "Any xenomorphs in there?" I asked. "Nah, you hear this, frogman?" Indeed, I could hear the thing from where I was standing. As I approached, I noticed the croaks sounded guttural, throaty and wet. If you've ever seen The Grudge, it sounded like the noise the girl makes, but not as drawn out. At that moment, I just chalked it up to my imagination. Alcohol intoxication, or a big frog, though my anxiety was already setting in. But what was strange was that there was a little water still running through the ditch from last week's rain, and typically, where there was water, there were frogs. Though the croaks were coming from one source, come to think of it, I do not recall any other noises. No bugs, no animals, no typical forest sounds, dead silence except for the frog. "What's wrong with Kermit?" he said. "I don't know, man, just come out. I'm starting to lose my buzz." With that, he scooted out backwards. Still a bit tipsy, he fell on his way out, then stood up to face me. I just got pooped out. We climbed out of the drainage ditch and continued along the dirt path. I could still hear the croaking, but it was faint. The sounds of insects and small critters rustling in the foliage eventually returned and filled the unnerving silence, the croaking becoming a distant memory, and I settled down a bit. It was a clear night, the moon was clearly visible, and stars dotted the sky like tinsel strewn about a black canvas. The trees, reaching tall, towering above us, and a nice cool breeze blowing the refreshing smell of pine to our nostrils. It was a few minutes before we arrived at the clearing that James broke the silence. "Hey man, what's up?" "Look, I am not sure how to even say this, but there's something I've been meaning to tell you for a while now. It's been weighing heavy on my heart, and I just need to get it off my chest." "Of course, you know it's just you and I out here. I'm here for you, man. You can tell me anything." "Thanks," he sighed. "It's just lately I've been thinking I might—" "Whoa, dude, do you see that?" Wide-eyed, he pointed his finger ahead. I followed and saw what he was seeing. A young buck, 10-pointer, still with velvet around the antlers. "Wow, he's beautiful," I said. We had a staring contest for about 5 minutes. Everything seemed normal about the deer, but most of its body was cloaked by the shadows casted by the trees overhead. What I could see was its head and a portion of its neck. It could have been the glare from the moon overhead, but the eyes looked glossed over, like thick cataracts, or like it had been dead for a while. It was also trembling, which could have been because of us. The tips of the antlers, I can remember clearly too, the way the moonlight gleamed off them, like the surface was glossy. I tried to take a step closer, and then suddenly the buck sprinted off into the woods. It looked like right before the buck ran off, the antlers twitched, like fingers clenching to form a fist. But I brushed that off too, trying to stave my anxiety once more, and we started walking again. I really should have turned back at this point. After an additional 3 minutes, we had arrived at the clearing. James and I began walking to the middle. There we lie down on our backs, staring up at the sky. We were far enough from the city where light pollution wasn't visible. We could see a portion of the Milky Way galaxy, and the moon was in its waning gibbous phase. This almost would have been a perfect night for the telescope. In hindsight, I'm glad we didn't bring it, because it was heavy and might have weighed me down. "Sir?" "Okay," I said. "You didn't finish what you were going to say back there. What's going on with you?" "Oh yeah, right. Well, I'm thinking about moving to—" Before he could even finish, he was interrupted by a scream. It sounded like a young girl if I had to guess around the age of 10. Help me. Who's there?" "Ah!" I could not move my body. I couldn't even speak. I felt bad that I wasn't jumping into action, but for reasons I couldn't understand at the time, I was paralyzed. A primal fear had awoken in me, and I could only manage to turn my head slowly towards James, our gaze locked. It felt like hours had passed. I broke out in a cold sweat and had trouble swallowing. My words kept catching in my throat, but eventually I managed to form words and spoke to James in a low whisper. "What should we do? Call the police?" "They'd never get here in time. And how do we explain where we are?" "Yes, officer, we are in some woods. There's dirt and rocks. She sounds hurt. We might need to help her ourselves," he reasoned. James was the first to get up. Once he did, he extended his hand out to me and hoisted me up. The direction of the scream had come from our right, a little way past the tree line. We waited a while longer to see if the girl would call out again. "I think we should head over there. Call out to her. She might be lost or hurt, man," James said. "No, I don't know. Something doesn't feel right. Don't you feel weird about this?" I questioned. "It's probably the booze, man. Regardless of how this feels, we need to go over there." We took a few careful steps towards the tree line. Before we got within 3 feet of the first tree, we heard a noise that has scarred me indefinitely for the rest of my life. For context, when I was younger, me and my friends would love to jump off the swing set at its peak because it gave us the sensation of flying. One time I managed to get some good height before I let go, but I botched the landing and all my weight landed on my right shoulder. It had become dislocated and I had to go to the hospital to have him popped back into its place. I am not sure if you all ever had something like that happen to you, but the noise from the shoulder bone being reinserted back into the socket is disgusting. You'd never forget it. This noise was similar, but incredibly loud and wet. I could hear the bones shifting and adjusting even from this distance, muscles, tissues, and sinew being torn with the sound of wet fabric ripping. Then a rustling of leaves and brush, followed by silence. Once again frozen by fear, we could only wait for what would happen next. A voice called out to us. Voices, to be precise. The girl's voice, but 2 other voices spoke with it at the same time and with the same cadence, one being a significantly lower pitch, the other sounded like my own. "Stoop, that hurts. Wow, he's beautiful." Hearing my own words and voice was enough. I pissed out the liquor all over myself in that moment. I don't know much about trauma and how the human brain reacts, But what happened next comes back to me only in fragments. Thinking about it too hard always results in a panic attack. I remember multiple gaunt limbs, a misshapen head with horns, matted and patchy blonde hair, tall and lanky body with saggy leathery skin, pustules all over. I remember it running towards us on all fours, body turned sideways. Then came the gunshots running through the woods. I remember hearing a deer bleat mixed with the sound of a death rattle of a dying old man. And the rest is a blur, but I remember waking up in my own bed. I haven't seen James since that night. Anytime I would reach out to him, there's no reply, and his phone goes straight to voicemail. I want to know if that was real, or if we were just drunk and imagining things. I'm thankful he was carrying his firearm that night, because I'm not sure if we would have made it back, but I don't understand why he won't talk to me. I just feel crazy. What was that thing? Has anyone else encountered something similar in the area? I've heard of things called skinwalkers from the forums on here. Could that be what that was? It was capable of mimicry, albeit not particularly good. I received a text message from James today, and it was one of the reasons I decided to share. It simply read, "You left me." I'm writing this now as a call for help. I'm desperate, and I don't know what to do. My name is Michael. I own a dairy farm in the Great Plains, near a Navajo reservation, along with my brother. The farm was built by our parents before we were born, and it was passed down to us after their death. It's a pretty big farm. It has 2 barns, a well and a house, where we spend most of our free time. Although I've always dreaded this place, because it's the place where our parents died, or at least where they were found. My parents died when we were both 19. Their bodies were found mutilated in the well. There was nothing stolen or destroyed. If not for the blood trail leading to the well, we would have never found them. The case was passed as a murder, but they never had any suspects, and me and my brother were too ravaged by the event to think about it. Years passed, and we forgot about the event, well, until 2 weeks ago. We were gathering food for the cows using an old tractor. It was pretty dark, but we didn't use its headlights because the battery was too old and couldn't stand them being on for very long. As I was loading up the food, I heard my mum's voice calling for me from behind some bushes. "Michael, it's been too long, come to me." But it sounded weird, as if it was spoken through an old radio. I was terrified. I looked at my brother and he was as white as snow. I whispered to him to turn on the headlights in the direction of the voice. What laid before our eyes made my knees weak. It was a coyote, but its eyes were pitch black, and it was standing on its back legs. I jumped in the tractor and we noped our way out of there as fast as we could. We arrived at the house and locked the door. That's the moment when I passed out. I woke up in the middle of the night. I thought all that just happened was a dream, but then I saw my brother telling me to stay quiet and pointing his shotgun at the door. Then I heard it again. "Michael, come here, my dear." Then it started to knock softly on the door. That didn't last for very long, though. The knocking turned into banging. Then my brother started looking through the window at that thing. It realized we were looking at it, and it let out the most horrific screech I've ever heard before it ran off. An hour later, it started again, the voice and the knocking. I've searched it up on the internet, and I learned they are called skinwalkers, evil Navajo men that sold their soul. Calling their name supposedly attracts them. I hope writing it doesn't trigger them. My brother wants to go outside and face it. I'm afraid we won't see the light of day again. Please help us. Being assigned to Camp Pendleton was a dream come true. Located in Oceanside in northern San Diego, it's one of the biggest Marine Corps bases in the US. There's a ton of stuff to do nearby, whether it's going to the beach to surf, swim, or go for drinks at the pier. The people around here are mellow, and there's a surfer sort of vibe to the neighborhood I moved into. Everything was going great for me the first few weeks while I was here. But I noticed that despite the laid-back attitude of the surrounding area where I lived, my work life was rigid and inflexible. My commanding officer gruff and no nonsense. I began to realize this place was not going to be a cakewalk. Then, one cool night, I woke up disoriented and far from my bed. Looking around, I saw there was nothing nearby, not another person for miles. Just flat, dirt ground with hills in the distance, and the black sky full of stars and a full moon above. I must have been sleepwalking, I thought to myself, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. I had been marching in my dreams while remembering my days of basic training, and I had somehow ended up in the middle of the dirt field. I looked around in every direction and finally saw lights in the distance behind me. At least I had an idea which way to go now. Turning around, I started to walk back towards the base, my legs wobbly from the long walk while asleep. It felt surreal to be out there in the middle of the night, and I didn't understand how it could have happened. I had been caught sleepwalking once or twice before, but I'd never gone anywhere near to this far. Part of me wondered, with a paranoid fear, just how often this happened without me realizing it. I walked for a few minutes alone, feeling an increasingly strange sensation, like a tingling on the back of my neck. After a while, I began to suspect it was that outdated lizard brain notion that someone was following me, a remnant from some bygone era when humans actually had to worry about being stalked in the night. Just as I had that thought, someone cleared their throat in the darkness behind me. A chill ran up my spine, and my flesh broke out in goose pimples as he spoke, his voice deep, gruff, and commanding. "Sir, what are you doing all the way out here so late at night?" he asked. He stepped closer, and in the moonlight I could see him more clearly. My voice caught in my throat as I looked at his eyes and saw they were yellow, like a cat, or a wolf, or a snake maybe. "Haven't you been told to stay in your hunk at this hour?" His tone was predatory and overwhelmingly creepy, but his demeanor was otherwise friendly. The part of my brain telling me to run was suddenly being hushed into submission by an unfamiliar voice, which told me this was fine and not to worry about a thing. "Look at his uniform," the voice said, and sure enough I looked down to see he was wearing a Marine Corps uniform with the insignia indicating he was an officer. "You wouldn't want to disrespect a superior officer, would you?" the voice asked. "Sorry, sir. I must have been sleepwalking. I'm just heading back towards the base. I can make it home from there." He showed his teeth in a grin and told me he'd walk with me for a stretch. "We must be distant relatives from somewhere down the line," he said as we walked. "Both of us out here walking in the middle of the night. I wish I could chalk my trip up to somnambulism, but I'm just a run-of-the-mill insomniac. I can never get back to sleep once I'm up. I usually just go out for a long hike. It reminds me of the old days when I was deployed, I guess, going for long marches that started before sunrise and didn't end until long past noon. The more time that went by, the more guilty I felt for having almost run from the man. He was just an ordinary guy. And the conversation became easier as we built up a rapport and I told him about my life and my background and where I was from. When I looked back at his face, I was shocked by what I saw. Maybe there really was a family connection between the two of us. In the increasing light from the base as we drew closer to it, I saw there was a striking resemblance between us. He didn't look like that when you first saw him, that suspicious voice in my mind said uneasily. His eyes were yellow, remember? And now look at them, they're brown. But it was quickly drowned out by that other, louder voice which spoke up and said all of this was okay too. It was just dark out in the dirt field, and I hadn't gotten a clear look at his face until now. "Tell me more about your parents," he said. "I want to know all about them. What are they like?"
I started speaking again, feeling hypnotized as I looked into the older man's swirling brown eyes. He was walking slower and slower, and I was matching his pace. The base was close now. I could see the lights of it were very bright up ahead, less than a couple hundred yards away, but they were getting dimmer suddenly. The light was fading, but how?
Were we walking backwards now? Was I even walking at all? Or was something dragging me now? It took me a few moments to shake the strange sleepwalker's haze from my vision, and I realized I had been in a trance of sorts. When I looked at the man's face again through my half-closed eyes, I was astonished at what I saw. He didn't just bear a passing resemblance to me, he could have been my long-lost twin brother. His eyes were the same shade of brown, his hair close-cropped and chestnut, his jaw was defined, and his nose was sharp and angular. But his smile and his teeth, those were not like mine at all. They were pointed and long, designed for tearing flesh from bone and ripping it to shreds. He was pulling me, dragging me across the dirt, deeper into the darkness again. "Who are you?" I heard myself asking, and in that second he changed completely. It wasn't like in a horror movie, when you see a man turn into a werewolf over a matter of a few minutes. The metamorphosis was not slow and drawn out. Instead, it happened in a split second. I blinked, and the man who looked like me was no longer there. In his place was an indescribable monster, tall with long limbs, pale grey skin, and pitch-black eyes. Its jaw unhinged as it revealed teeth longer and sharper than those belonging to a wolf or a bear. It reminded me of that strange, ethereal white-masked creature from Spirited Away, full of hate and hunger and wanting to consume everything. It didn't appear solid. This thing looked like it was made of shadows. A shot was fired suddenly, bringing me out of my hypnotized stupor. I realized that I was being dragged away from the base. The creature had my shoulder between its jaws, and it was biting down so hard I could feel it grating against the bone. Another shot rang out, and I heard a few people yelling. There were footsteps, and I heard something approaching from behind me. The thing tried to pick me up in its jaws, and it was so massive and so strong that it actually succeeded momentarily. I thrashed and punched it in the face, kicking it in the eyes. My shoulder was on fire, and my entire arm felt like it was dangling by a thread, as if it would pop off at any second, unhinging at the joint like a Thanksgiving turkey drumstick. And then for a second I thought it would. It popped out of the socket and dislocated. The flesh began to rip and tear and bleed. The creature nearly tore my arm clean off as another shot rang out. I gave it one more good, hard kick to the face, and the already wounded monster dropped me to the ground, letting out a low moan of pain. It fell, its form turning into a large black puddle of darkness like an oil spill, before skittering off into the night like an infinitely long centipede. It blended in perfectly with the shadows and was gone a second later, just as a few other Marines arrived. "Are you okay?" one of them asked, helping me to my feet. "Man, I never thought I'd live to see someone get attacked by a mountain lion. You're lucky to be alive." It took me a few seconds to comprehend what he was saying. It was so bizarre. The thing which had just attacked me looked nothing like a mountain lion. It was long and tall and humanoid, with a black wispy shroud surrounding it like a living cloak. "Man, are you blind?" the other Marine asked. "That wasn't a mountain lion." I breathed a sigh of relief. I wasn't crazy. Someone else had seen the thing as well. "It was a wolf, a big grey wolf. Man, I've never seen one so big. You sure are lucky to be alive, though. That's for sure. Do you want us to call for an ambulance?" I shook my head. "No, I'll be fine. I can walk." I took a nervous look at them both, as if judging for myself again whether they were human or not. But I decided these two were the real McCoy. If not for them, I would have been that thing's dinner. The two of them walked me back towards the base, and I tried to decide whether I should tell them the truth of what I had really seen. But with each step we took, the memories started seeming more and more surreal and dreamlike, to the point where I even started to convince myself I had exaggerated what happened. Maybe it was a mountain lion, or a grey wolf far from its pack, desperate for food. But no, the memories could have been wiped away, but the teeth marks were not. They were strange, and totally unlike anything a wolf or a mountain lion might leave. When I went to the infirmary to get the bites looked at, they told me they'd never seen anything like them before. After several sets of blood cultures and antibiotics, they never did figure out what was wrong with me, or how to get rid of my symptoms. Sleepwalking being primary among them, I would get up from my hospital bed in the night, and it would take a whole team of security guards to get me back into my room. So desperate I was to escape. Back to the fields, I told the men. I needed to get back to the dirt fields, to march. All they could do was watch as my symptoms got worse and as black vein-like formations began to spread from the bite wounds, like a dark plague spreading throughout my body. Everything is so cold now, and I feel like I'm losing control. I don't want to feel like this, but I can't help it. Whatever bit me, it infected me. Its contagion is spreading throughout my system, and I can no longer fight it. I get these windows of time when I'm with it enough to speak and live my life, and then I get a period of darkness where I remember nothing. They discharged me recently, leaving me alone to deal with the symptoms myself. I think they're worried about having me so close to the base. They don't know what I'm capable of anymore. Most nights I wake up far from home and don't know how I got there, just like that night in the dirt field, like I'm sleepwalking all over again. Except that's not what this is. This is something much worse. The dark veins are spreading up my neck towards my face, making me stand out and look strange. People think they're bizarre facial tattoos, inching their way towards my skull. They keep asking me if I'm all right as sweat pours down my reddened face and my eyes dart around with nervous paranoia. The blackouts are getting longer and closer together. I don't know how much longer I have left to be me, and I'm terrified of what's going to happen when those veins get to my heart and my mind. Who knows how long I have left before I'm out roaming the dirt fields, looking for a meal. Skinwalker stories from Reddit, Story 4, Smiling Skinwalker. By Writer Ifaz. Written by Uyakobel Mao. Year written, 2019. I've had a draft of this story set up for a while, but I've been too worried and scared to tell. It made me question everything. My faith, my eyes, my sanity. I've decided it's time to finally let others know about what I've experienced, as it may help me move on. At least, that's what I hope. I recently moved westward to Arizona from the boring state of Oklahoma. I am a devout Christian, and never once before this had I believed there were entities in existence that we couldn't hunt down with our modern advancements. It's 2019, for heaven's sake. You'd figure if we wanted to find something, we would, and most of all, we could. It was the 23rd of December, 2018. I was in Payson, Arizona, a bit north of Phoenix. My friends and I, in our Christmas spirit, decided to head out north of town, about 5 to 6 miles or so, into the forest on a secluded trail. It was cold that night. Some of my friends shivered and displayed obvious signs of unpreparedness. I was layered fairly well, and yet the winds and frigid cold punctured through my layers and onto me. We wanted to make a bonfire, warm up, enjoy ourselves, and a few drinks. I knew as soon as I got into the car to head that way, something was off. I felt sick, uneasy, and something in my gut told me to just stay home. But I couldn't put my finger on just what, and ignored my ever-so looming feelings of anxiety. We picked up friends and headed to the trail. I'm a huge nature lover, and always felt safe in the confines of the forest. I felt in control, at ease, but not tonight. It may sound cliché, but I'll be damned if it didn't feel like someone or something was watching me when we finally got there. And when I had gotten far enough down the trail that turning back would be no hasty endeavor, it finally hit me why I felt so eerie. That same year, during the weeks prior to Thanksgiving, I was here before. It's not a spot we usually go to, therefore I was not familiar with it, nor were my friends. We were coming out for the same reason. We were in December for a few drinks around a bonfire. It was late. I, however, hadn't had any spirits that night. It was my job to gather firewood. I didn't mind. My chance to survey and explore the area around us wouldn't be bad. Before I even left our area, things took a turn for the strange. I was at the edge of the light being cast from the small bonfire I was to gather more fuel for. In the faint glow of the far trees, I caught a glimpse of something dart behind a tall pine. I asked backwards to my friends if it was out of the ordinary for people to be hanging around this spot. My query was only met with silence from them as they drank on. I took a few more steps beyond the comfort of the blaze, keeping my eyes affixed on the tall, shadowy figure fixated behind the tall trees. I could faintly make out that it had moved in a slight bobbing motion, like a buoy upon a tide. My immediate thoughts drew a blank as to why someone would be out here doing this. Maybe I was seeing things, or it was a prank of some sort. I opened my mouth to call out, or even crack a joke, but was mortified when I realized I could not speak. Something inside of me prevented me of making any noise. My heart raced. As it swiftly came, it shot off into the distance like a bullet. Being startled so badly, I fell back onto the ground and kicked myself back like a spooked animal, scratching and cutting my hands as I do so. My friends saw me and laughed, thinking I was drunk. I managed to stammer out a line to what I saw, but was only met with a few blank stares and laughs, making me sound stupid. For the rest of the night, I never dared step away from the beams of the bonfire. As I walked down that trail that frigid December evening, I remember what I had seen and felt on that cold November night, and my stomach dropped. My friends were slurring out Christmas carols and other drunk epiphanies. I know they wouldn't listen to me, even if I spoke out, so I ignored the guttural feelings, prayed for the best, and walked on. I hadn't been drinking much this night either. I don't enjoy alcohol as much as my friends, and often I was the one responsible for herding them home when the night was over. However, to calm my tense nerves, I had a drink or two from some Jaeger we had chilled in the ice chest. It was Christmas after all. It worked. We were all having a good time, enjoying our festive feelings and generally savoring the crisp forest atmosphere. Soon, nature called, and forgetting my prior ordeal, I began to walk away from the fire to relieve myself. I walked a fair 300 or so feet away towards a big rock, resting behind some fallen trees, not wanting to be seen, doing my business. I was not even far enough away from the fire to not be able to hear my friends' voices echoing through the woodlands. From behind me, my friend Corbin, who had come along, called out my name. I'll admit, I was tipsy, but nowhere near enough to not differentiate reality from a drunken stupor. I remember calling out to him, telling him to give me a moment to finish. I zipped up and turned to walk around the rock to where I heard him wander to. I don't know what it was, but sure as all heaven above and hell below was not Corbin. It took me a minute for my woozy mind to put this together and stop walking towards it. I'm thankful I did. This being stood tall, at least 6 to 7 feet, its eyes burned like our fire. It moved from a dog-like 4-limb position to standing tall. The light from the moon on this cold night radiated the body, showing off its dark, slender shape with an inhumane sheen. I began to sob, violently. My mind ran in panicked circles. Seconds felt like lifetimes as my world ground to a halt at the clawed feet of the beast that I was sure was going to take my life from me right then and there. I did the only thing I could think to do. I dropped to my knees and began to pray. This monster, to my petrified brain, had to have been the devil himself. To imagine him anything worse than it would be impossible. It did not like my pleas to God. An unholy shriek of what I can only think to describe as someone screaming loudly with lungs full of water rang out. I screamed in terror, and with all the strength I could muster, lunged backwards across the forest floor, running as fast as my legs could take me. I fell a few times. I think, in sheer panic, I just couldn't manage to get my body to work properly, knowing that thing was near. When I returned in a panicked craze to the fire, covered in sweat, dirt, and tears, I managed to wheeze out what happened somewhat through my sobs of fear. I could tell they doubted whether or not what I was desperately stammering out was real or not. I think I was so horrified in that moment that I had a small caesura, because everything else is a blur. I remember going to the truck, leaving. I remember waking up the next day receiving a multitude of texts saying I was either stupid and crazy, or texts from worried friends asking if I was okay. And I also remember the last I saw of the thing before I made my frenzied flee, when it smiled back at me through the forest and skittered off into the darkness. A few days after Christmas, I was able to get in touch with a native elder here in town. I was so scared mentioning the event because I was worried of being mocked or him not believing me. To a twist of my thinking, I told him very vividly what I had encountered. He wholeheartedly believed and told me it was a skinwalker. He then blessed me thoroughly and told me to leave that stretch of land alone and to never venture out there again. Next time I might not be so lucky. He didn't have to tell me twice. I know I sound crazy. If I were you, I wouldn't believe me either, but you don't have to. All you have to know is, for the love of God above and all things holy, never forget that we are not alone on this earth. Sometimes during the night, whenever I look out my window, I catch sight of eyes in the trees looking back at me. I will keep this thread updated. I am still horrified. I tossed and turned a lot trying to fall asleep. I couldn't get comfortable on that damn bed. A rock was probably cozier than that mattress. So against my better judgment, I got out of bed and walked about the cabin. I reasoned that if I stayed up late enough, I would be so tired that I would fall asleep no matter what I was laying on. I think I briefly contemplated sleeping on the floor. I wasn't that desperate yet. It was pitch black outside, no lights from any nearby street lamps, no car headlights. Hell, not even the cabin lights were on, and I don't remember seeing a single star. It was a bit creepy, but I shrugged off the shiver creeping up my back as simply the cold tile floor beneath my feet. I did, however, find it odd there weren't any lights on at all on the property. You'd think there'd be a floodlight on the horse stables or in the main office, but no, nothing. That was really weird. I stepped outside in my flimsy foam flip-flops to get a better look. I could barely make out the ranch, and for some stupid reason I decided to go walking around. Eventually, my eyes adjusted where I could see well enough to navigate. I paced up and down the road where the cabin sat, and then circled around to the fenced-in field where the horses were out grazing. Except there weren't any horses, probably in the stables for the night, I reasoned. I shivered again. It was getting cold. I turned around to head back to my own cabin. It was stupid of me to be out all alone at an obscene hour, I had realized. I needed to get to bed. But when I turned, there was something in the middle of the road. Its shape was swallowed up by the surrounding darkness. I could barely make it out. But whatever it was tall and thin. I shrugged it off as just a pole or something else, and kept walking, but then it moved. I froze. My breath caught in my throat and I could barely breathe. I just imagined that, I said. I just imagined it. I'm freaking myself out. Get your fucking head straight. It moved again. My paralyzed throat managed to squeak out a pathetically weak whimper as my legs began to lose strength. I shivered violently against a cold that was building up inside of me. My eyes began to focus on the impossibly dark figure standing against a barely visible sleet-grey night. Now I could see it. It was a person, but like nothing I had ever seen before. Its arms were impossibly long, its legs impossibly short. It had a torso far too long for its rail-thin body, and a head much too big for its pencil-thin neck. Its right arm was sticking out to its side, swinging up and down. Its blockish head rolled onto its left shoulder, jerkily twitched up and down, up and down. It didn't move other than that, just stood there, twitching, arms jerking up and down, head lolling around its shoulder. I still stood there like the dumb fuck I was. My cabin was a few hundred yards behind that thing, and I wasn't so stupid as to try to walk past it. My only option was to go around, behind the cabins and the stables, and hope it didn't see me. I forced myself to lift my foot off the ground to step backwards. My flip-flop made a loud, wet smacking sound as it cracked against my foot, and I immediately froze in horror. The thing stopped too. It stood there perfectly straight, perfectly still, listening. I stayed as still as I could. My breath was shallow and panicked, and I tried to force myself to slow my breathing before I started wheezing. My heart thundered in my chest. My whole body was shaking, but I didn't move. Neither did it. I began to slowly, so goddamn slowly, bend over and slip my feet out of those fucking flip-flops. My feet touched the dirt and the crumbly gravel, but at least now I could move silently. I spared a quick glance to the side to see where I was going. 2 cabins were immediately to my right. I could slip between them with ease, disappear out of sight. I only looked away for a second. When I turned back, that fucking thing was gone. It was fucking gone. It fucking knew I was there. It was coming for me. Oh fuck. Yet, I still couldn't fucking move. I was paralyzed. I couldn't move no matter how loud my head screamed. Run, run. Run, you fuck. Run. I heard something behind me. I turned instinctively, even though I knew fucking better. I still turned the fuck around. I was greeted with 2 bulging eyes, oh fuck its eyes, staring at me unblinking, with 2 black pinholes for pupils, and an insane smile that was stretched far too wide to be anything remotely human. My paralysis broke as I stared at that fucking thing. I fucking ran, crying my eyes out, trying to scream, but a horrible lead weight in my throat silenced me. My feet pounded on the dirt. I stomped over anything in my way. I trampled over a jagged rock, slicing my foot wide open. I ignored the pain. I ignored my body screaming in agony. I ignored my own blood pouring from the wound. I didn't care. I just ran. I felt the cold creeping up my back. Oh God, that cold. It was sinking right into my bones. I couldn't stop shaking or sobbing, and I didn't stop running until I burst into the cabin. I slammed the door shut, dead-bolted the lock, and leaped into my bed. I huddled under the blankets, hiding my head, and there I gasped and shook for breath. And I waited. I didn't sleep that entire night. I was too scared. I couldn't get rid of that chill. All I thought about was that thing, standing there and twitching. Morning finally broke, and I finally allowed breath of relief. Whatever I had seen had not come for me, and now that it was light, it could no longer take me by surprise. My mum noticed my bleeding foot and the blood I tracked through the cabin. I shrugged it off, said, "I cut myself the night before when we were making s'mores." I don't think she believed me, but she didn't push it. We left not long after that, and as we left, I looked at the place where that thing once stood and I shuddered again. But there was nothing. I assured myself there was nothing. We said goodbye to the ranchers and to our companions, and I noticed the man from Kentucky who said had thoroughly enjoyed my story. He told me again how much he liked it, said he was going to tell it to his own kids when he got home. They really liked scary stories, he said. And as we drove away, his head rolled onto his left shoulder, and he smiled a wide, insane smile as he waved us goodbye. Thank you for dropping by the archives and listening to our ghastly stories. Don't forget to like, comment, and lastly subscribe. Until next time, archivists, I bid you all good night.